Tonight, we will go deep into the realm of the unknown and question everything as we search for the truth. We will explore the possibility of countless phenomena within the ultra spectrum, and together we will learn that it is all connected. This podcast is brought to you by the Experiencer Support Association, and it is a live stream broadcast. If you have a question, send me a super chat or become a YouTube member. This podcast is brought to you by the Experiencer Support Association. Take a seat, relax, get ready, and welcome to Beyond the TinFoil Hat.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Beyond the TinFoil Hat. Today is Thursday, September 22nd, 2022, and I, Ryan Stacey, am your host this evening. I'm a licensed private investigator, citizen journalist, and the director of investigations for the Experiencer Support Association. Welcome to the channel, and thank you for joining us this evening. A special thanks goes out to all our YouTube members who help us keep this program and others free for our experiencers. Remember that as a member, you get to ask questions live here tonight. For all you non-members, you can support by super chatting or sending a tip on Rockfin. And remember that every little bit helps. So thank you. At the 2-hour mark, CC and I will have our after chat. So stick around and we will keep that conversation going and chat with everyone in the live chat while we discuss our thoughts about this episode and share some recent news for Tessa. All right. So I'm going to try something new here. Tonight's theme is paranormal research author and inspirational speakers. Our guest for season 4, episode 30, is Morgan Knudsen. Knudsen? Yeah. Did I say that right? All right, thumbs up. All right, she has been involved in the world of paranormal phenomenon for 20 years. Her story with a great-grandfather. Her story began with a great-grandfather, Dr. Albert Durrant Watson, who was the president of the Association for the Psychical Research of Canada in 1918, which was one of the first paranormal associations developed in Canadian history. Co-founding and leading Entityseeker Paranormal Research and Teachings in 2003, her experiences and knowledge has led to researching and co-creating a unique investigative program called Teaching the Living. Subsequently, she has been featured on and hosted numerous specials and TV shows, such as A Haunting on the Discovery Channel, Destination America on T&E. She's been on the Travel Channel, CBC, CTV, Planete, TLC, and Crime Investigations as well. Her work has also been presented at the Rhine Research Center by the Winbridge Institute in 2020, and she is a member, host, and a feature presenter at the Parapsychological Association. Morgan uses her outgoing tell it like it is approach in determining haunted locations and creating solutions for the people involved. I like that. Her programs are now practiced in 3 different countries and a part of numerous social work and psychology secondary education courses in Edmonton. Oh, so you're Canadian. Nice. Morgan subsequently received the award for the City of Edmonton for outstanding service in 2008 and graduated from the the Alvarado Zingron Institute for Research and Education 2 years in a row, receiving 2 graduating certificates of distinction in parapsychology. Morgan is also a regular contributor to the #1 magazine in the UK, Haunted Magazine. Morgan can also be heard on her podcast, Supernatural Circumstances, with co-creator Mike Brown, Dark Poutine in quotations, which that's interesting, which delves into the mysterious, the spiritual, and the fascinating things in our universe. You can find her and everything else on Entityseeker.ca. All right. So Morgan, put on your tinfoil hat. We're about to go down a rabbit hole. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. You have quite the experience. Wow.
Thank you. It's been a journey. So.
Yes. So before we get into that, we're gonna start with our icebreaker question, which is provided by CC on behalf of the Experiencers Anonymous group. And I'll just play a little jingle here. Okay, so CC asks, what is the one thing you see happening in the world today that we aren't talking enough about?
Ooh, that is such a good icebreaker question, CC. That is a really good question. I think assuming this doesn't have to necessarily pertain to the paranormal, I'm guessing this is more of a general question. I think one of the things that we often fail to talk about is embracing the part of ourselves that people don't necessarily want to address. I think that's one of the things that we need to talk more about. It's really easy to go through the world and sort of suppress the things that we need to heal, or that we need to address and look at, that just might not be so great. And I think one of the things that we don't get enough discussion around is our role in how we interact with our environment when we don't heal those things. So that I think that would be probably in my top 5.
I would agree. We do need to spend more time enjoying the phenomenon, I guess.
Yeah.
Say, instead of, there's a lot of fear out there, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering, not a lot of enjoyment. So that's kind of how I feel. Perfect. Okay, so the next question I usually ask is, why are you the way that you are? And what I mean by that is, tell me how you got here. And I know we mentioned in your bio, inspired by your grandfather, right? Great-grandfather?
Great-great-grandfather, actually. Yeah.
So that's his history. So how did you get connected to that? Where did that start for you? How far back did you go?
Well, this is actually really interesting, because I actually didn't find out about his history until about 6 years into developing Entityseeker. So my business partner, my best friend, Stephanie Wirtz, who has since passed away, she and I were fascinated with this stuff. And it felt like a calling for us, because we had both had experiences when we were really young. And it was just like there was a magic about this that was so special, that called us to ask bigger questions, even at a very, very young age. And so we really put our childhoods and things like that aside to invest in the world of parapsychology and the paranormal, not knowing where it would end up leading us, obviously. But we just connected with that together so closely. And when we began the study, we started noticing that there were patterns within the paranormal phenomenon that we were seeing, and the patterns in relation to the people and their emotions and their behavior connected in with the phenomenon that they were experiencing going forward. And it was really interesting to us, and to the point where that was where we threw all of our energy. And when we thought we finally had something that was somewhat concrete that we could share with people, after doing a plethora of investigations and stuff like that, and we started these workshops, and the first one was called Teaching the Living, and it's stuck since then. But it then became a realization that this was about connection with something greater than us, and it was about empowerment for people, and that's where this needs to go. So that was really the driving force, and we kind of had this pact together where we said, number one, this will never interfere with our friendship. The day that this interferes with our friendship is the day we quit. That was one of our initial prime directives, because we were best friends. But the second one was to make this information available to everyone on a very accessible level. And that was the other aspect to what we wanted to do. And I think we've managed to do that as best we could.
Okay. So what about any personal experiences that happened to you before that happened?
Yeah, I mean, there was plenty.
Research, but like, you could have picked any field.
Yeah.
So what kind of drove you into that?
Well, I was really fortunate, first of all, because I grew up in the era where the investigators that you could access were people like Lloyd Auerbach and Carrie Gaynor, and people that were extremely reputable researchers. So those that I had access to through television and things like that when I was very young were those people. There was no entertainment, ghost show, scary stuff. It didn't exist. So I was really fortunate in the fact that when I had caught some of these programs on TV, I was exposed to some very, very solid, good information. And we were, at the time, my family and I were living in BC, and we were living in some pretty amazing places that had some crazy phenomenon. One of the instances that I remember very clearly was a house that we lived on one cul-de-sac, and it had an incredible array of phenomenon, everything from the residual energy of a woman screaming. We had doors opening and slamming that didn't move. We had a dog that would jump up on the end of our beds that you couldn't see. There was really, really unique stuff going on, and it was constant, like it was just all the time. So I was really fortunate in that I lived in a number of these places that really immersed me in this phenomenon for real. And to me, as much as the early incidents freaked me out, like it would any kid, it was one of those situations where I really fell in love with the phenomenon. It was like, this is all this stuff that we're being taught all our lives shouldn't be happening, and here it is. We're experiencing this. And I was fortunate to have really open parents about this also. It was just something that was embraced as, they didn't know what it was, but it was never made out to be something that was horrific and terrifying. It was just, this is part of the wonder of the world. And so it captivated me from a really early age.
Cool. Well, it makes sense. I had a similar experience too, because I'm a UFO guy now, but like I've always been paranormal. So like that curiosity, right? So you know that it exists as an experience, or when you experience it, and then you want to know more, and then you got that inquisitive mind, which is why you create all these things. So when you say you created this program called Teaching the Living, what exactly are you teaching?
Well, it's not really us that's doing the teaching; it's the phenomenon that's doing the teaching. But it's really ultimately the understanding that what we are experiencing and the energy and the emotions that we bring to the table are really creating in our reality as well, and that we really do have a co-creative experience with the universe, and specifically with paranormal activity, like such as hauntings and what people consider hauntings, and psychokinesis and things like that. The parapsychology is not separate from the living, and oftentimes what we think, and what's driven home with us in the media and some of the TV programs and things like that, is that this stuff is asserted on us and that we have no control over what's going on. And we really do. There is a mechanism where we've got this ability to not only interact with the phenomenon, but at times create it. So when we're delving into the realms of things like psychokinesis and research by people like Dr. Scott Rogo or people like that, you've got a whole nother level of exploration that you can begin to delve into, and that's really what I try to bring to the table with people, is that this can be some of the most empowering information you're ever going to get, but we do have a role to play, and when we start to own and understand that role, then you can have some amazing experiences.
And I appreciate that too, because there are a lot, in my experience, there are a lot of people that come to the reporting part not understanding what's going on, but there's these fears and these anxieties and these judgments and thoughts that are associated with it, which may not actually be true. It's just that fear of the unknown. Why me? Why this? What's going on? We don't understand. So when we work with them and we remove that and we realize that it's still possible, are you on the side of where do you fit on this? What do you believe is happening when you talk about the phenomenon? What is the phenomenon to you?
Well, in my field, I deal primarily with things like hauntings and stuff like that. So, talking about UFOs, I think it's a slightly separate category, but from my perspective, in terms of hauntings and stuff like that, it really is the study of consciousness, and it is our interaction with the greater consciousness, and whether that be survival after death, whether that be our the greater portion of our consciousness and how it affects the world, whatever that looks like. But I think I do think there is a universal consciousness that is not emergent from the brain, but fundamental to the universe itself, and that the brain is translating said consciousness. So so I think for me it's that interaction with the phenomenon and how we are as physical beings in relationship to that greater source.
Mm-hmm. So with consciousness in mind, and you mentioned hauntings, are they the same thing or separate? Is this a consciousness event?
Well, it depends, because you hear in some ways it is all connected, because oftentimes even when we get hauntings that are just replays of events in the environment and things like that, that type of thing is generated from thought. There is an ability for thought to somehow be recorded into the environment, and now parapsychology is looking at the idea that this has to actually do with memory cells and things like that, which is pretty cool. But it really does all come back to us. And so as much as we want to be able to say, okay, well, this is just something that's out there that is happening, it really does completely come back to the person that's having the experience, because all we are translators of experience. And that's why some of us can sit in a room of like 5 people, have something happen, and every single person experience it differently, because we're all translating that in a different way, whether it be translating light, whether it's translating event, whatever it is. So I think when it comes to hauntings and things like that, if you're talking about say like maybe a disincarnate intelligence or something like that that's in the space, again, it all comes back to is this thought, is this consciousness is being projected from somewhere else, like, so it all does tie back to that one question, I think.
Okay. So what about the poltergeist phenomenon? How does that fit in?
Well, it's a really good question, because that's where you really get into the idea of psychokinesis, right? Where you start looking at, and there's a couple of definitions of poltergeist phenomenon as well. Some people consider it like an actual thinking entity that is able to move things around, where another group of people might consider it as just straight up psychokinesis, where it's actually somebody who is using their focus, maybe unknowingly, to manipulate things and objects in the environment. But Dr. William Roll and Dr. Scott Rogo both believed that it was a mechanism of thought and focus. And they did extensive studies into the idea that this was a demonstration of our ability to manipulate our environment on a non-physical level. And their experiments were phenomenal. They had quite a number that are fully documented. And for people who want to read more about that, they can go to the Psi Encyclopedia online. Is free. It's completely free, and you can read the white papers and stuff like that on Dr. William Roll. But he had some very, very interesting ideas about this being connected to people's emotional center, which I have found to be accurate as well, and is part of what I do with Teaching the Living. And that is the idea that these extreme emotions end up producing sort of like a lay effect, and there's a delay effect, but the ability to maneuver objects and interact with the environment using that focused thought. And it's pretty cool stuff. So again, it comes back to that whole idea of this is it's consciousness, and there's something going on, whether it be us or something else.
I share that, because with I'm studying the experiencers in that sense too, and the data that I've been collecting is I've been having this theory that what you said is what's going on. I have not been to the point where I've been able to test it, but I feel like you've been in a position where you have seen, or perhaps you can manipulate, consciousness as you described. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, there's some really great organizations and whatnot out there that have perfected this to a degree that I have not. But it's a great fellow to look at is Dr. Joe Gallenberger from the Monroe Institute. He has been phenomenal, because he has actually taken his workshops in regards to psychokinesis to Vegas, because instantaneously you can get results of that. You can take that idea where you are able to manipulate objects and get immediate results at a craps table, at roulette, all of those kinds of things. And he's been able to replicate this pretty readily, as I say, to the point where he's able to do workshops and things like that. But the Monroe Institute, who were the group who was contacted by the CIA to teach remote viewing and things like that to the agents at the time. This was back in the 70s, during something called the Gateway Project. And they perfected it to the point where they could fine tune the frequency of somebody's brain. And they teach this. You can actually go to the Monroe Institute and actually take these classes and fine tune it to the point where they can teach people how to do this stuff. It's really cool. But they're like the leading edge of this on a level that I am not, but they're pretty cool.
What I appreciate about it is that it's possible, and
absolutely,
which there are a lot of people that have this belief that it's not us, it's something else, right? And we often not look at ourselves as being the host or the cause. And that there's a whole lot of sociology and ethical issues around all that stuff as to why. But I appreciate hearing that and knowing that the science has shown that, and there's more data showing that in your work, because that's in line with my goals on those things too. So why do you think this? I guess the physical beings comes in place, though. Is that? So I guess in the paranormal spectrum, see, we're talking about three different things here. There's like we're all over the place. So I know where your head's at, but I got to try to break it down. So we have paranormal, parapsychology, and then we have pretty well everything else. So maybe we'll just do some rapid facts here. So is a ghost, a ghost, or is that connected to parapsychology?
Well, parapsychology is the study of that, right? So, the idea of a ghost in the definition of parapsychology is something that is a little bit more residual, is sort of that almost recording that is played back that might not have actual consciousness in real time. But then you get the survival after death hypothesis, of course, which is that consciousness continues and we have that interaction. And there's plenty of evidence to suggest that is correct as well. So the idea of what is a ghost, I think, depends on the definition that the person's holding about what that is. But I think both have been demonstrated scientifically in a really solid way. So many of the skeptics will be like, well, no, that just, that doesn't exist or whichever. And I find that oftentimes that's where the uneducation is, where they haven't read the current studies, they haven't read the papers, they haven't read the stuff that Yale's doing or Princeton's doing, or they've just missed it. So I think but yeah, the definition of ghost depends on where you hold that.
So where do you hold that? What's the definition for you?
I think for me, when I think of the idea of ghost, I always think of something that is not something residual. I always think of something that is a little bit more intelligent, that interacts with us in real time a little bit more. So I think that's where I sit with it. At least when it comes to mind for me.
Yeah, coexisting in real time.
Yeah.
Not in the past, not in the future, but again, it could be either or. But I'm comfortable with coexisting. So if it coexists, then that means it's living. Is it human?
That's a really good question, and I think that's where a lot of debate has come in over the years. I know for me, there's definitely been case studies that I've done, and the Monroe Institute came to an interesting conclusion about this as well in their papers, where they were finding that they were dealing with something that they would consider like a thought form, where it's thought that's projected and then has become intelligent through focus. And it's an interesting study. So in Canada, in the 1970s, Mensa and the Toronto Society of Psychical Research did a really interesting experiment called the Philip experiment. And they were actually able to demonstrate and prove this, that a lot of what we're experiencing is these thought forms that are focused to the point where they have a consciousness, and you're able to interact with them. So what they did was they actually had this group of people that created a character by the name of Philip that they called Philip, and they gave him a backstory, and they did all of these different things to the point where they convinced themselves that this Philip was real, and they wanted to be absolutely sure, no doubt, that this is what the case was. And then they started interacting with it. They would come and do like seance type sittings and things like that, and acting as if Philip was something that you could talk to or conjure. So as they did this, they were sitting around their table, and they worked on this for about a year. And eventually what ended up happening was that Philip began to respond. And it would respond to its name, it would respond to questions, it would respond it would move furniture. It would have physical interactions with the environment. It was really phenomenal. And interestingly enough, it only knew what the participants knew. So if you asked it a question and the participant had the wrong answer, it would give the wrong answer as well. So, and they wouldn't, of course, know that until much later that the answer was wrong, but it was coming from that specific person. So they recreated that event again with a new group of people with a character they called Lilith, and they were able to repeat the experiment again and again. This happened. So long story short, anyway, long answer to a short question is it all human? No. I think there is strong evidence to suggest that we are dealing sometimes with this thought forms and that thought and consciousness creates, which really screws up people often because they think, well, how is that possible if they don't have a brain? But the current model that parapsychology is working with and that science is now leaning into is that the consciousness itself is not emergent from the brain, it's fundamental. So our brain is translating the consciousness in the same way our eyes translate sight. Our eyes don't have an image inside them. Our eyes translate light and energy to give us an image that our brain concocts out of the molecules and atoms that we're looking at. And they're looking at that with consciousness and thought and things like that as well, that the brain is acting like a translator. So that being all said and done, the idea of Philip being created through thought and focus becomes really probable.
And the challenges that I see with that is interference, because like I appreciate the experiment, and it's something that I thought about doing too, often, quite a lot, just to kind of prove that human element, because I've always thought, pun intended, I've always thought that our like, okay, so the seance for me. So this as an investigator, I'm looking at a seance. So we got individual people trying to all share that thought or share that energy to get an answer from this device. Okay, so there's a variance of answers that could come in, but in that room, you have different types of people thinking. And then you might have different types of people that have a different level of psychic ability, psi ability,
Sure.
that they may be aware of or not aware of. And the challenges that I always have in the, not necessarily to debunk, but to cross-examine, if you will, is how do we know that the one person that is doing it, that's putting the intention out there as the host, isn't receiving a response from the answer that they're getting from somebody else in the room because they're really thinking about it.
Yeah, well, and there's where it gets interesting, right? Is like, where does telepathy come into play with something like this? And what was cool about the Philip experiment that I thought was neat was that they only used people in the room who did not consider themselves sensitive or psychic. So I thought that was a really interesting thing. Like, some of the people just had like zero, no clue, So if anybody, perceived themselves to be sensitive or psychic, they weren't allowed. So I think that definitely sets something. And, there were other fail safes that were put in place as well. Because I say it was like Mensa and the Toronto Society of Psychical Research. A lot of these people, they were, pretty knowledgeable, a lot of psychologists and stuff. But I mean, I don't think you're ever going to escape that entirely, because of course you can't control what's going through people's heads, and you can't, but all we can look at is the results of the experiment and the fact that it was able to manifest twice. There's another researcher, Anthony Peake, who's working now on recreating that experiment again in the UK. So we'll see in the next couple of years what comes of that, because I think that could be very interesting. And he's putting in some new parameters as well.
Having, I guess, doing a survey beforehand to see people's comfort level or of the psi abilities, that's a good point, because if that's what the evidence is showing, then it's more human because they're unaware of it. Whereas someone because it's like an ability that can be developed over time, it can be enhanced. So if you're aware you are good at this or have the ability to do it, you're going to practice it. That's how we get these people today that are doing these things, because they realize that they can do these things and then they own these skills. So there has to be, and I believe that there is. It starts with the human being. Yep. Now, the interesting thing is, as you mentioned, the UFO phenomenon is separate. It is, I believe, it's connected somehow, and I'm trying to figure out how. The UFO, like the crafts itself, could be machines, but if you look at the lights, you look at the orbs, you look at all these, different ways of seeing things. So there's different sensors and things like that too. But there seems to be a pattern where experiencers, throughout their course of life, what I've seen is that it starts with contact, starts with a UFO sighting or maybe some beings or something like that. And we don't call them ghost or paranormal because it's just the way we were raised, but it's still an entity that doesn't exist on another side. And then later on, they experience the cupboard doors flipping, doing all these other things at the same time that they happen to be going through puberty. And then later on, they happen to feel spiritual and natural and all these other things, and they develop a Reiki school or something like that. And all of a sudden, they're end of life, and then they're doing tarot card readings, and they can read tea leaves and do everything just like that, right? So, like, I'm totally like generalizing here, but the point that I'm trying to make at it is that I'm finding that it's very common that it started with some sort of contact. So perhaps we weren't always like this, or we have been always like this. Like, what do you think? Like, where did this start? Because we're evolving now. It's just becoming more popular and more apparent, as you said before, that paranormal is evolving.
I think it's such an interesting question because we also have to mix into that the fact that more people are being allowed to acknowledge it as well. So we've got this growth of people who are now coming forward saying, this has happened to me and things like that. I think what I've found throughout my research and whatnot is that when we're very young, often we have these abilities are quite heightened, and usually it's the sort of the same with the bumblebee. Why can the bumblebee fly? He shouldn't be able to fly. Well, nobody told him he couldn't fly. And with kids, it's often very much like that. Like they're not told you shouldn't see these things. You're not told any of that stuff. Until much later, their minds are very open because the world is full of possibilities. And when that state of expectation is that the world's full of possibilities, these things begin to happen. And then we see it again, end of life, terminally ill. Often we'll then have these experiences as well. Like the busyness of the mind has left and stopped, and there's more space for connection on a bigger level, I think, in these two phases of life. But I think as with humanity as a whole, I think we've been through kind of this interesting graph chart in that it started out where everything was connected to the spiritual. You go back into like Mesopotamia and Babylonia and places like that, and every illness was paranormal. Every illness, everything was spiritual. Everything had to be believed in a spiritual realm. And then we began to understand. I think it was the Assyrian tablets that first described the first case of epilepsy, I think. And here you had this sort of growth into science, and then everything became far more concrete, and then they misinterpreted science, so everything had to be then concrete, which is not what science is for. But then and then it sort of came back again when they realized that, well, wait a minute, there's more. There's so much more to this universe, and that these spiritual and these scientific principles are very much interlinked. So I think we've evolved as our understanding, and almost as an expression of the universe. We're evolving in that way. But ultimately, I think we're going to continue to have more experiences because we're speaking of it more. That's the one thing that the plethora of ghost and UFO programs and things like that have done. Even though they've done some harm to the field, they've also opened up the conversation in a brand new way. So we're having this kind of interesting graph of evolution, I think.
More people are thinking about it, so more people are vibrating at the same frequency.
Exactly.
And therefore, so more things will change. So how soon do you think paranormal will become normal?
I think it's coming. I think it's coming. I mean, how many gatherings now can you walk into and say, I felt like so-and-so that passed away was with me yesterday. How many people are going to laugh at you and tell you you're crazy? Probably not many. You can now walk into these places and say, look, I've had this experience. Just this past Saturday, I did a show at an arena here in Edmonton on cryptids and experiences that people have had around cryptids. And the arena was full. Right. So it's like all these people are going, this is cool. This is amazing. There wasn't, there's no hecklers in the audience. Everybody's just fascinated. And people come up to you and say, man, I never thought of it like this. I think people are looking for the magic in this world again, because we've been through such hell over the last number of years. And I think people are looking for that connection and for that magic. And I don't think people are sitting in judgment of that. They're sitting in judgment of a lot of things, but that's not really one of them anymore.
And awareness is key, because there are those sitting in darkness, because they might think, why me? Why is this affecting me? And when you talk about cryptids, like beings, entities, wherever this space is that we're connected to, I call it the ultra spectrum. So this ultra spectrum, where all of us are drawing from the same source, we all call it something. How we're perceiving it, and our anxieties and fears and all that other stuff are subjected to ourselves. So you got that negative thought, and then you got that positive thought rebelling. So angels and demons. So is it just a negative thought versus a positive thought, or are there, in your opinion, actual malevolent? Can't say that. Well, say that word for me.
Malevolent. There you go.
Beings. I'm trying not to say the other one, but yeah. Are they bad ones?
Yeah. Well, again, the way I always
bad thoughts and good thoughts.
Yeah, and the way I always explain it to my clients is it really does come back to your predominant place on that emotional scale, in terms of what you're going to end up receiving. This is one thing that I noticed really, really early on, and Stephanie and I did a really deep dive into a concept called blue zones. And the blue zones are really interesting because they were designated by a National Geographic journalist, a freelance journalist by the name of Dan Buettner. And he was told to go find the happiest places in the world. And this was really interesting for us because when he did, so places like Icaria, Greece was on the list, Loma Linda, California was on the list, Sardinia, Italy, Okinawa, Japan, there was a whole bunch of these blue zones. Interestingly enough, I think Loma Linda was the only one in the US. And I don't think Canada had any of them. But they were designated by what they called the Power 9, and the Power 9 were things like, how supportive are the people around you? Do you prioritize support? Do your communities prioritize, well-being? Are people allowed to get the time off when they need it? Basically, and none of it had to do with money. It all had to do with your own ability to maintain your well-being. How much people walking, enjoying outside, things like that. And what I found really interesting was that when you dove into the experiences of these people in these different locations, their interpretation of spirituality and paranormal activity was very different than the West. So for example, you'd go to a place like Okinawa, Japan, and there was a military installation there. It was there for many years. And they wanted to bring the westernized, crazy haunted house experience to Okinawans because they were like, oh, you guys don't have a haunted house? Like what? We want to do this thing for Halloween. So they built this thing, and it was like the typical scary walk through the house and people are screaming and whatever. And nobody attended it. And they couldn't figure it out. They're like, no, like this is cool. We have these all the time in the States. And the Okinawans were like, yeah, but the paranormal is not scary. Like, why would you do that? Yeah, they couldn't connect with it because they're just like, yeah, but it's not though. Like, why would you think that the afterlife is something terrifying? So they couldn't connect with it. And so they weren't having these same experiences that people over here were having with these frightening things. And so when we really began to look at that, we just realized that, where not only our expectations sit when we experience these things, but, if we've got a bunch of junk that we haven't healed up, if we've got these emotional issues, or we're predominantly angry or predominantly frustrated or whatever's going on, interestingly enough, when you look at the cases, you can really easily correlate the type of activity that's going on with the people and their emotional state and what they're going through in their life. So we realized really quickly that our job was not with the entity, regardless of what it is. That was almost irrelevant. Our job was with the people, because as soon as they began to heal whatever was going on, then that activity started to shift. And the reason why was because, you were mentioning vibrational frequency, and this is such a really great example of that, where now all of a sudden you're receiving from a different place. So it's almost like a radio dial. So if you're over here and you're experiencing, hell on earth with the activity that's going on, and you shift your dial, then all of a sudden you're receiving from this different point. And we realize that ultimately people they've just got to shift their dial a little bit. And so our focus mainly became that, which is what teaching the living became, and which is why it ended up in social work and psychology programs and all sorts of stuff. Like that was because it really does come back to the person, like what we were talking about. So, is it about negative and positive thought? Yes, but on a on a wider scale, I think, a broader scale, more about how we're feeling, and therefore the thoughts we're thinking are generated from how we're feeling.
What's high is we're definitely hive conscious. Like the environments do change us, and in a good place with a lot of good things, you're going to create a lot of good energy, and then in a bad place with a lot of bad things, you're going to have a lot of bad energy. And you as an individual could tether between either or,
absolutely,
unintentionally, because you can feel it. You walk into a room, we can feel when there's someone in that room that you like,
absolutely,
just shitting on everything. You might not know who right away, but you're like, this is not good. I'm going to go back over there, and we feel that. And so there's different parts of the world that feel differently. So like to kind of like come into the whole, again, just because I like when people think that the UFO community is different than paranormal, because my job is to try and bridge everybody. That's what I'm trying to do is kind of share the thought there, is with this PSYOP idea where propaganda and mainstream media and all these other things, they have these rules and plans in place, perhaps allegedly, to instill a certain thought for a certain reason. So like if we have like war, for an example, war, even the threat of war, even the pandemic put a very specific thought in mind to everybody at once.
Yeah.
And when everybody had that thought, everything kind of collapsed. But then eventually we started to think differently after a certain amount of time, and things started to change and all these other things. Yeah. But if hypothetically, according to some conspiracy theorists, if that was deliberate and on purpose, my question is, why would we want the entire world to feel negative at the same time?
Well, negative is powerlessness, right? Like, when you're angry, you're by far at your weakest state. You're not clear, your head's not clear, nothing's clear. You're not thinking about other people. You're not thinking, it really is your most powerless state, because you feel powerless, and therefore the results that you end up getting are often an echo of that. So, anytime you've got a system or anything like that is looking for, like control over people, or, whatever happens to be the case, it is far easier to control people who are upset and emotionally reactive than it is for people to control somebody who is clear and can remove themselves from the emotion of what's going on. There was a quote a number of years back. It was so interesting, from Goebbels, from World War II propaganda minister from the Nazis. And he said that there was no way that anybody in their right mind, anybody was a clear thinker, would buy into the garbage that they ended up promoting their propaganda. They said there's no way. He's like, that anybody's going to believe that. And he said, I had to figure out a way to sell it. And what he determined was that he could sell it by appealing to people who were extremely emotional and easily upset. And once you can get in with those people, those are the people that will grab it and run with it and sell it, because they're not thinking clearly anymore, and they're not connected with source. They're not connected with who they are. They've lost that. They're absorbed into the mind. And that was how you do it, because no clear thinking person is going to buy it. And I think with where we kind of sit right now, that's one of the reasons I think why connection and why things like parapsychology and like what you're doing with the experiencer support group and whatnot is so important, because as that healing starts when we are able to connect back with the greater part of who we are, and realize that the mind and the thoughts that we are thinking are not the real us. It's not the real, that's not who we are. We are something more than that. And when we can realize that we are that stillness behind the thought and we are not the ego, then we really start to gain back control of who we are. And you can feel whether or not something's right when you hear it. So when you're listening to things, whether it be on the TV or the radio or other people or whatever it is, when you're listening to these things, when you're in touch with that source, instinctively when something isn't right. You don't have to have somebody tell you. You're just like, that doesn't feel right.
Yeah. And I always said that people don't change unless they feel different.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a readiness, right? Like there's 4 readiness steps for change. And the last one is, like the first one is you're just forced into it. But then the last one being that you can't bear to deal with the situation you're in one more second of one more day. And you're so sick to death of that you'll do anything to shift.
And a shift is important, because like to be in the middle, I often consider, maybe it was done deliberately, or maybe it was just a happenstance or whatever, but it's the why. So if it was done deliberately, what is the end game? And to reference what we've been talking to, if there's more people becoming aware and more people sharing love, then we get more love. If we were to do an assessment of the negative thought versus positive thought pre-pandemic, I would wager that post-pandemic, there is more positive thought than negative thought, because we've all been humbled by losing all these restrictions. So now the vibration and positive vibration should increase in theory, because we all should be grateful for all the things that we have all took for granted. So all the conspiracy theories out there, if it was done deliberately, then it was done wisely, in a sense, to push us into a positive future. Because if more of us think positive, then more positive things will happen. So, and that's just evidence that show we as human beings are energy beings. Otherwise, we wouldn't be affected by negative or positive thought. It wouldn't matter. We'd just be robots.
Well, and a great example of what you're talking about is there's a project that's been going for quite a while called the Global Consciousness Project. And what they do is they use random number generators to track differences in the global consciousness field. And they've got these random number generators all over the world. And whenever there's something that happens, like, for example, the death of the Queen as of recently, or
we all felt that.
Yeah, they did it at Burning Man. They tried it at Burning Man. All of these different high level or crazy events. I think they recorded it during 9/11 as well. But really impactful historical events that they've tracked, and it's very interesting to watch, because it's like here you'll be going along in life and the random number generators are just doing their thing, and then all of a sudden something happens and the random number generators just bloop, and you're like, what is this? Like, what just happened? And it's like, it's a really fascinating thing. And some of the things that you think would, disrupt the RNGs don't. And then other times you're like, wow, people were really paying attention to this. But it's a neat thing to be able to see statistically on a piece of paper. It's pretty cool.
It's science.
Yes.
it's it's scientific theory to measure and quantify something that we can't touch or see or anything like that too. So it's just, again, proof. So, okay. So is there, in your opinion, with, I guess, life after death?
Yeah, I believe that.
This stuff is happening, coexisting in present time, communicating with each other and other things. But how does the soul continue after we check out?
Well, and that's, I think, a question that's been on the table for a long time in new ways lately, because we're beginning to understand more about things like, alternate universes, various probabilities and realities, and setting ourselves up to experience one probability over another probability. So as quantum physics has really taken a great role in parapsychology for the last, I would say, like 10 years or more. That's one of the big questions. Is it something where it is just simply another vibration that is just out of our realm of senses? Is this does this consciousness shift over to a different universe or a parallel universe, and this probability ends? We can look at things like, I think, near-death experiences and get a bit of a clue from some of those. I did in my book, The Gift of Instinct, I talked about Dr. Eben Alexander, who was a neurologist, one of the chief neurologists, and at his hospital. And he ended up with a severe case of very rare meningitis that killed him. And when he was in this coma, he wasn't responding to medication at all. And during this time period, he ended up having this incredible near-death experience. And when he came back, he was able to relate a lot of pretty incredible information. And as a neurologist, it was something that was really important for him, because he said, this is, the consciousness is so much more than what we think it is. I think we can look at some of those and start to pull bits and pieces. My great-great-grandfather, for instance, when he wrote his 2 books, he was dealing with a channel by the name of Louis Benjamin. And interestingly, the entities that called themselves the humble ones, they were a cluster of consciousness. They would basically say, here's what it is for us, and relay different experiences and stuff that has echoed and mirrored what people have experienced with near death. So I think we can sort of garner little bits and pieces from all these experiencers that we've been lucky enough to talk with.
Mm-hmm. With near death, it's near death, so like they're still holding on. They haven't actually detached.
Yeah, some of them have actually, they die on the table and then they're resuscitated or something like that as well.
Did the energy actually leave the body, or is it just kind of just slowly fading out? Because sometimes you can what did they used to do back in the day, because they couldn't read a pulse properly? They used to bury people alive because they had low blood pressure, and things like that too. So one step further from that, not near death, actual death, we know they're gone, they're buried, they're in the ground, and the next you see them. So how is that explained through your eyes?
Well, I think it comes back again to the idea of consciousness being fundamental or emergent. And I think if we're glued to the idea that the consciousness is stemming from the brain, it doesn't make any sense. But with the idea that it is fundamental to the universe, that we are just translating said consciousness, then I think it makes a little bit more sense that consciousness is still is in existence. It's just we've lost the vessel, and that connection can still be made. And I think that's one of the most amazing things about parapsychology and some of what I get to experience with people is, when these individuals will come to my workshops or lectures or whatever, and they're like, I just lost my father, or I just lost so-and-so. And, all these people around me are having these experiences with them, and I'm not having any experiences. And, being able to say, like, just hang on a minute, and, within like a month or so later, having them email and say, what, you were right, it happened. So I definitely think that there is something there, because I've seen too much at this point.
is that them actually there, or is that residual memory from the ones that are grieving?
Well, yeah, I think it depends on the interaction that they have. Like, I mean, sometimes what they will do is bestow information that somebody did not have before, and it's called a veridical apparition. But within these veridical apparitions, I think that's where you can start to measure it. Like, what is being told to this person? You know, is there information that they didn't have previously, and things like that. And you can start to then break down whether or not this is something that is conscious, or whether this is something that's just playing back. But the Windbridge Institute, those good friends of mine, Mark Picozzi and Dr. Julie Bichel, they've done a lot of research into this, and they've definitely come to the strong conclusion that this is indeed something that's conscious, or the majority of it is something that's conscious. So, I mean, I definitely revere their work, and I think they're spot on with what they're saying.
So, what about reincarnation? Body leaves, it's there. Does that same energy re-enter?
Yeah, I think it can. There's some really great papers by a fellow by the name of Dr. Ian Stevenson, and he's kind of known in parapsychology world as the reincarnation guy. And I think reincarnation is probably one of the best mechanisms that we can look at as to understand what exactly is going on with life after death, and that exists. A lot of Ian Stevenson's work was with kids. And it's really interesting to listen to some of his information, because these kids who are 3, 4, 5 years old are coming to these conclusions, and you're going, okay, like, there's no way this kid should know this information, and yet there they are. So I think it's a good mechanism to look at in support of the idea of the survival hypothesis.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. Okay, so we're going to pause right here, but we'll continue after a message from our professional partners. I don't know where my thing is, so I'm just going to... you are listening to Beyond the TinFoil Hat podcast by the Experience to Support Association. This is the first one back in a couple of weeks, and I'm a little bit rusty, but I'm having a good time here with Morgan. And you are watching Beyond the TinFoil Hat podcast by... I already said that. Right. Okay, we'll see you in a couple of minutes. Peace.
It's your business. It's your property. Your assets are worth protecting. Blacklight Investigative and Surveillance Services specializes in patrolling and inspecting residential or commercial property against fire, theft, vandalism, terrorism, and illegal activity. People and buildings are monitored to prevent crime. Keep your property, your people, and your assets safe from threat. Our elite staff are dual licensed private investigators and security guards. Blacklight Investigative and Surveillance Services. Go to blacklightiss.com.
The same thing that draws aliens to our planet is the same thing that draws us to others. Exploration, curiosity, sustainability of life. That's why we go. It would make sense as to why they're visiting here.
Travis! Quit playing around, man. Get back here. Travis!
The last thing I remember was this numbing shock. Stunning sort of a feeling. Very powerful.
Get away from me!
I was just out of my mind with fear, just screaming the whole time.
It's been theorized that aliens prefer remote areas because they don't want to attract attention. Whatever it is that they're doing, they would want to do that in a less populated area. There are multiple accounts of the same thing from people from all over the world. People that do not know each other, do not live in the same cultures, and they're all looking up, they're all seeing things in the sky. So it would be naive of us to think that
Ryan is one of Canada's leading new UFO investigators. He conducts and oversees UFO investigations on a constant basis and was really taken by his research. He's compiled a tremendous amount of data regarding UFOs in Canada. And just as interesting, he really goes over how UFO investigations are done. And what are some of the mistakes that people make when they submit evidence? Note for starters, don't edit your videos or photos before you send them. If you want to hear more follow-up conversation between Ryan and myself, you can go to richardolanmembers.com, where we have a candid conversation on ufology, the paranormal, and more. And remember, while we learn and grow and search for the truth, let's be good to each other.
Welcome to the Observation Deck, a state-of-the-art, one-of-a-kind virtual platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus, just like you would in real life. First, you install the application and design your very own unique avatar. Then you're free to explore the various areas of the campus at any time from anywhere. There's so many areas and activities to choose from on the platform. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, a large expo hall, a movie theater, a nightclub, an art gallery, and even a beach. Come attend a conference or take a class or hear a lecture. Meet new friends and interact directly with presenters. It's all right here on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Where in the world will you go?
Have you ever wondered, or maybe just thought to yourself, if there were others just like you? You know, people with extraordinary abilities, psychogenic advancement, and perhaps unique intuitions. Maybe you just wondered if there were other people who experienced unimaginable, unexplained, or even unusual and paranormal events. Are there people who have more questions, more fears than answers? Well, you're not alone. You've never been alone. We believe you. Sign up for EA today by going to tesacan.org/EA. That's TESACAN.org/EA.
Welcome back. You're listening to Beyond the TinFoil Hat. Have you ever experienced an unexplained event involving the paranormal, UFOs, extraterrestrial, dogmen, or any other paracryptid? Head over to YouTube. Head over to our website, www.experienceyoursupport.org, and submit a report. Let the others who have already reported be that example that proves we are making a difference. And if it wasn't for these reports, we would not be able to do what we do. And for that, we thank you. If you're wondering where to get a hat like this that I'm wearing today, you can get it from tinfoilcap.co and support the Leak Project. Thank you, Rex Bear. I'm actually surprised I will be a guest on Rex's show next week, too. So that'll be good. All right. So, you're back.
Let's do it.
Let's do this. Okay. So, kind of all over the map, and I'm trying to tie it all in here. But see, paranormal is like parapsychology is like the thing. This is the study of consciousness and the mind and all these other things that connect it to everything. Then there's this ufology movement where they think that the government is behind it, I guess. Okay, so even if it's machines, there's still MK Ultra. There's still a bunch of psyops and things like that that could connect all these other things that having a support and driving forward. So we know all these things. We're capable of doing all these things. There's a lot of science on your side that suggests that it's human and normal. And then when the human dies, there's more human, and then there's more normal. Where do you think this idea comes from, these cryptids, as you mentioned before, these beings, these aliens, these monsters? Because those are physical.
Some of them.
You have the elementals, I guess, as well in the spiritual side. So where does that fit? And because they don't biologically look like us.
No, and it's interesting that It's a great question, because this is actually something that myself and one of my researchers, Terry Lynn Blake, we've been pondering this question for quite a long time. Around especially some of the recent cryptid sightings, things like Dogman and stuff like that, that don't fall into the physical, but at the same time don't fall into the non-physical either. So for example, you take something like the Beast of Bray Road or something like that, where it seems like something that's very physical, but at the same time, you go to take a photo of it and it comes out as mist or something like that, that it seems to have this sort of, almost transient physical state. And I think it bears repeating, or at least reminding of us normies in our meat suits, that we're not entirely physical either. We definitely land a little bit further onto the physical spectrum, but at the same time, there isn't sort of a non-physical and a physical. This exists on a very much a spectrum. So I wonder with cryptids, just where they kind of sit within that spectrum, and maybe aliens might fall into this category as well. Is just to where it actually sits within the spectrum of physical to non-physical. Even in hauntings and stuff like that, we still get physical responses and reactions, like physical movement of objects, walking into a room and seeing somebody physically and feeling someone's physically sitting on a bed, which actually moves the bed, stuff like this. There is a physical component to it, in the same way that with cryptids, there is a very strong physical component to it. So I don't know, I almost wonder if it is on the spectrum, but I mean, in terms of like where they're actually coming from, I think is a mystery to everybody at this point.
Would it be possible that they are in that realm in which we're drawing all this consciousness from?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, I think everything comes back to that. I think everything comes back to that source. But as to what degree or where from, I mean, there's been people that have reported, seeing flashes of light, and these things step out from, what they consider like almost like a portal, and they've stepped out in these flashes of light, and then the flash of light disappears and they walk off. I mean, there's been some really strange phenomenon that's been going around with some of these sightings, whether it be, aliens or Dogman or whatever it is. So yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's elements to our universe that we are so far behind on in terms of our perception that we really can't explain it right now.
Well, yeah, like the metaphysical versus the physical, in my studies, I'm on this, we want to believe everyone, right? We want to believe that what they have experienced is true to them, especially when there's concerns around it. You may not necessarily believe what they think has happened, but in common investigations, there's been numerous reports of stories where they've seen something incredible. You can tell by their character and judgment that they're telling the truth of what they believe it to be. There's plenty of opportunity to capture evidence, or they try to capture evidence and it just doesn't appear on camera. So that could be them not knowing how to use the camera, them not thinking about it, or pointing in the wrong spot. The skeptics can do that too. But if you have the belief, if you can prove the character and you believe them, and it makes sense because you have other people reporting the same thing, it might have happened in their mind without them realizing that it was a consciousness event, because they see it out in the reality and they believe it to be physical when it might actually be metaphysical. And so what I'm learning is that like you're studying people that are kind of aware that they have these abilities. There's a group of people that have these abilities that don't even know it.
Sure.
And that kind of gets in the way. And for me, that would make sense because it's a place where all this stuff fits. But how do we measure that? How do we fit?
Yeah, it's a big question, and I think only time's going to tell in terms of what we're able to understand about that area of the universe. as I say, we're so far back right now in terms of this stuff, and some of it's just coming to light over the last 10 years. Just in the last little bit, less people have been labeled crazy than there were 10 years ago, and more credible people stepping forward to talk about it. So I think that's where we really have to lean into trying to gather as much testimony as we can, and to be able to start to piece things together through what science is telling us, what many of these organizations, these research organizations are telling us right now. Because I know for myself, like there's some things that have just hit my desk in regards to this stuff that I don't have an answer for, and I don't think anybody else does either. There's a good friend of mine in Wisconsin, or in Pennsylvania right now, but often does his investigation work in Wisconsin, Eric Mintel. And the two of us are going back and forth all the time, because we have properties both in Alberta and in Wisconsin that are very similar. The two of them are like mirrors of each other activity-wise, and we have no idea why. They're sitting on fault lines. We know that might play a role in terms of the electromagnetics and things like that. But they're very similar property-wise in terms of the topography and geology and stuff like that. But bizarre things that are I still get calls going, I have no idea what this is or what this means. And all we can do is document until pieces start coming together.
Mm-hmm. It might even be biological. Study.
You never know.
I'm measuring trends with blood type. I'm measuring trends with hair color.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting characteristics with experiencers. I'm seeing trends.
Yeah.
Statistically higher. I'm seeing it in fair-haired and fair-eyed females seem to be the most common ones that have these experiences. So what I'm tracking here is you and your friend are living in these places, though, right?
Well, she is. I get to visit. I'm lucky enough that I get to visit.
Have you compared your places, but have you compared yourself to each other? Like, do you guys have similar traits, similar abilities, similar? You guys could be the cause, and that's why the same thing is happening in either place, because you guys are on the same level.
Well, her place is very different from Eric's case, in the sense that what do you call it? Genealogically, there's no connection. The one house is owned by a math teacher. The other is owned by a social worker, psychologist. You've got two different. She's First Nations. He's Caucasian. There doesn't seem to be any correlation in that regard. But what we found within parapsychology is that it's not necessarily the physical traits that, at least in these cases, and within hauntings, that seem to be the main factor, but rather personality type. The studies have shown over the years that people who are more outgoing, more bubbly, more extroverted, people who are genuinely happier with life, typically have more experiences than people who are, say, maybe more left-brained, a little bit more introverted, and things like that, and that they typically don't have the same level of experiences as the others. So in those regards, you can start to compare some of these cases and go, hey, wait a minute, there are some similarities, but not necessarily physical, but actually personality trait-wise.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense too, because extrovert, you're putting the energy out, whereas introvert, we're putting the energy in.
Yeah, and a little bit less inhibited in terms of risk taking. So a little bit more willing to believe certain things, other than somebody maybe who's introverted, who's worried about what somebody might think of them, or something like that. Keeping stuff inside rather than exploring new things.
But it's still possible from either side. It's just a different method. It's just a different thought, and then you throw that in the whole mix of psychology and everything else that what kind of life did they have, and all the suppression and things like that too. So
absolutely,
still human. I love
still human, man.
My research is telling me that it's humans. It's not, and that makes it easier to solve.
Yeah,
we study the people because we can measure ourselves. We can
exactly.
Measure what we do. We can measure what we say. We can measure how these things with each other.
Yeah.
to investigate all the cryptids, we got to find one. Bigfoot is this huge thing, huge thing. A lot of types of evidence and things like that closely related to monkeys and apes and all that fun jazz.
Yeah.
But we haven't caught one. And if we were able to catch one, then we could study it, we could understand it. But we can catch humans.
Yeah, and we can study, and this is what I learned early on with Steph, was that we could that type of phenomenon is it can be very hit and miss, especially when you're dealing with hauntings and stuff like that. I mean, it's very difficult to predict when something is going to occur. Oftentimes it's very much off the cuff of whatever's going on in the house at the time. But you can turn around and look at the people, and that's your constant. And the rest become variables, because you could have a glass blow up or a door fly open, or a myriad of different things could happen, but your one constant is the people. So that's really what you can start to turn in and look with, and then look at is well, what's the common denominator here? And it's there's a person that's there that is experiencing these things, and if you can begin to work with them, then things start to shift. I was actually talking with Eric Mintel earlier today. We were talking about the Beast of Bray Road and the Dogman not too far from here. And that was the one thing I was telling him, was that, we get the most positive responses when we go out to this property and just be positive. Like, how would you want to interact with something, and put it out there and allow that to be your point of attraction, where now all of a sudden the experiences that you're going to have begin to meet the energy and the intention that you're putting out there, and it, I mean, almost 100% of the time you see a response. But it really is, it starts with you. You can't control what's going to happen out there. You can't, especially in this field. But you can begin to control your emotional set point and where your point of attraction is going to be. When you can do that, then all of a sudden, the world starts opening up with this stuff in a big way. And interestingly enough, the psychic experiments that have been conducted in places like the Institute of Noetic Science and places like that, when people go into it with exactly what I was saying, with these set intentions of open-mindedness and positivity and joy and passion about something, the response, whether you're doing a Gansfeld experiment or remote viewing or whatever it is, they are so much higher than the people who walk in that are skeptical or miserable about it. That it's a drastic difference. So it's a measurable difference. You can see it just play out again and again. And I think, when we bring that to the field, then we see that reflected back there too.
Mentioned Bray Road. I don't know if you can follow my pen, but there's a pennant there, that red one.
I see.
Yeah, that's the Beast of Bray Road right there.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's cool. That's why I moved my chair over. To show that. Okay, so yeah, I mean, for the experiencers, the whole point is first me to understand, why this is happening, so that way it helps us refer you to the right people at the right times and right places. So there's that evidence that shows that we're capable and it's possible, and there's evidence that shows that depending on how we perceive it and how we think will change the outcome of the same thing. And the goal is to, when we exhibit negative thought and negative behavior around it, is to try and change that, so that way at least you can think positive. Now, in the abduction phenomenon and things like that, that is negative. That will always be negative, and there's different things that we have to work on. But in terms of healing, so what I'm kind of framing to with this is, I want to know about your approach to your investigation, because you are an investigator as well. Yeah. So you're quite versed in this. You've done your science, you've done the research, you understand what's going on. But how do you, new case, what do you do? Walk me through that.
Yeah, every case is different, depending on what's actually going on. But at the end of the day, the first thing we have to look at is the people. which is where my interest is instantly, because you can almost predict the type of phenomenon that they're experiencing as soon as you get a good history of what's going on with them. And that really is something that's so important. Oftentimes in this business, people immediately go to the phenomenon and they're just like, well, I gotta look at all the phenomenon and try to figure it out. But if you start with the human being, you can really begin to understand where the phenomenon is coming from. Like, so for example, I've had quite a number of cases where there's been, some sort of violent phenomenon that's been going on in the home, because rarely do people call me when they're having a good time. So when, you'll have this crazy, chaotic, haunting or whatever it is that's going on, and they're going, I don't understand where this has come from. And then you get talking with them or you interview them and you find out that there's, been chaos in the home for a long time. Maybe there's like spousal fighting or abuse. I've had cases where, there was a young woman who had gotten out of a extremely abusive marriage with her young son and had married a new guy, a really nice guy. But because she hadn't cleaned up the emotional trauma of what had happened during that experience, the entity and the consciousness that was now inhabiting the home was delivering the abuse in the exact same way that the prior boyfriend had, and she couldn't figure out what the hell was happening. She's like, I just got out of this, and now here I am dealing with this in another front. Well, that's the one thing with the universe, is that it'll replicate it until you clean it up. So, for her, the work was, getting her to a place on an emotional level where she was, healing and dealing with things and getting her joy back. And getting some of that joy back within these people's experience is really, really, really key. But it's looking at what's going on in the home, looking at what's going on in the business. Sometimes it's a business. And understanding the dynamics. And then once you can do that, you can start to see the reflection of the dynamics within the spiritual activity that's going on in the house too. So once you can sort of clean that side up, and as I say, it looks different for everybody because every case is completely unique. And sometimes that involves pulling in outside resources, getting them to go to classes, getting them to, whatever it is. But it really does keep coming back to what's going to restore the equilibrium for these people and just get their joy back, get their life back on track. And once they do, that stuff becomes irrelevant. It starts to shift and change on its own, but it's not going to do that until people start sorting themselves out. And that's why you hear oftentimes of people moving from house to house to house to house and saying, well, I'm cursed, or, I've just moved again and there's more stuff going on and, it's following me. Well, it might not be following you, but you probably found another one. You've created the same thing again, and you'll keep creating it until you start cleaning up the root cause of what's happening. And moving does not help. Wherever you go, you take you with you, unfortunately. So until that root cause is cleaned up, it's not going to change. It'll just show up in a different way. And sometimes it'll show up not in the form of a haunting. Sometimes it'll show up in the form of continuous bad relationships or continuous bad bosses. You quit one job, go to another job, and the boss is terrible there too. And it just repeats itself again and again and again. And since with some people, it just shows up as paranormal stuff.
Mm-hmm. But not so paranormal, actual normal, because we're thinking outwards, thinking it has to be something. Exactly. There's that belief. If they're related in there, we want there to be something after it. So belief gets in the way, faith gets in the way. Okay, so you're in a situation where all that stuff exists. You've done your investigation. You're aware that there's some untreated trauma that needs to be processed. Do you leave, or do you just, or how do you help them? How do you communicate that to them?
All my clients I've ended up staying in touch with, but it's all been a situation where it is connecting them sometimes with community resources. I mean, I've got my limits as to what I can do. I mean, I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm not these things. So you have to start reaching out to people around you that can help these people long term. Because sometimes it takes a week, sometimes it takes a year, right? And it's their journey, but ultimately it's getting them to understand that here's where the change needs to happen. I can be a compass, but I can't be the solution. They've got to be the solution to what's going on, because they're the only ones that can make the definitive path to where they want to be. And there are plenty of people that don't want that. There are plenty of people that are quite happy to stay in the mess that they're in, because looking at what they need to fix is too painful, and it's just simply easier to have some crazy paranormal phenomenon going on around their house than it is to look at the hard stuff. So there's plenty of that as well. Or people that just, they just don't want to accept that they've got a role in it. So like, nope, this is something they want to play the victim, and they pull the victim card, and that's it. So I mean, there's plenty of people that don't want to do it that way, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, that's going to be the root of what they want to do. But I can point it out. You can lead a horse to water, but that's as far as it can go.
Well, your approach is bang on, because that's the way it should be done with investigations. And even with victim crisis situation, they show up, they just witness a murder or suicide, something traumatic. They do the same thing, bedside manner. They deal with everything, and then they provide them resources, to help deal with that. Now, quite more tragic than other things, but I mean the concept of basically listening and being there, and then providing something, and then allowing them to make themselves better, if it's possible. So, in your field, like, do you find, like, you're not a clinical psychologist, but are there clinical psychologists out there that is willing to touch the subject matter with belief, and not just turning it around, say, throwing in schizophrenia and other terms like that?
Yeah, and they're out there. Actually, a good friend of mine, Dr. Cal Cooper, he's one of them. He's a psychologist, and works at out of Northampton University, in Northampton, United Kingdom. And he actually has a program that he works with here in Alberta as well, that studies hope. And his specific area of study is bereavement and grief and parapsychology, and the relationship between all of those things. But there are people that are out there, and there's more coming. Interestingly enough, South America is really far ahead in that department, further ahead than a lot of the West, where they started very early on, sort of a counseling organization for psychologists and things like that, where people that have had experiences can come and connect with a psychologist that actually won't tell them they're crazy. And it's coming more and more, but that's one area where I think there's still progress to be made. There's a fellow by the name of Dr. Alexander Moira Almeida in South America, and his work has been fascinating, because he's been dealing with using fMRI imaging and imaging the brains of psychics and people that have had these abilities, and proving the fact that this is not a type of schizophrenia, that this is actually activating a different part of the brain. And his main goal is to try to eliminate the stigma that this is some sort of crazy mental illness, or something like that. And it's work like that I think is really, really important, and to not marry the two together in a way that, just because you have a mental illness means that these experiences aren't real, and just because you're having these experiences doesn't mean mental illness isn't real. And I think that distinction is something that's really important. But there are more programs that are coming out. But I would encourage anybody that is, had these experiences and is seeking a psychologist, really vet these people. Really vet these people, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you're just, getting prescribed medication or something like that for something that is a legitimate, personal experience that isn't tied to delusion. And, we're at that point, we know that, but not everybody understands that in the medical field yet.
I appreciate that. And the reason why I asked that question is because I trust what you're saying, and I sense the truism from that, because I have vetted out some who claim to have credentials and learn that they don't. And there's manipulation, there's money, there's monetization, all that other stuff that gets in the way. and they are sure they're there, they're providing a need, but they're not actually doing the proper work. So, in the future, perhaps there might be a message there where we could perhaps share resources, so we could connect my people with your people to make sure if there's help available. That's something that I've always been looking for. And I'll give you an example when we come back to like kind of providing clearings at houses or something, some sort of support. So one of the options is, yes, referring them to outside parties, but you got to leave them there in the home. And a lot of times people resort to smudging or house clearing.
Yeah.
So my question for that is that a common trend thing in your opinion, or like, does it actually work literally, or are we just giving them peace of mind to change their thought temporarily so they can go to bed at night?
Yeah, and the funny thing is yeah, I mean, ultimately when you're dealing with any kind of ritual, that's essentially what's happening, because there is no one way to deal with this stuff. I mean, every culture, no matter where you are in the world, whether you're in Africa or whether you're in Canada or wherever, every culture has a different way of doing it. And ultimately, the power in these rituals is the fact that it gives us empowerment, which shifts our or the vibration in which we're attracting. And when we do that, when we shift our place on that radio dial, we begin to attract different things. So if that ritual is empowering, and it's something that will allow you to stay within that empowered state, and start to feel better and move on, then it works. Then it's great. If you're coming at this as something with fear, or I'm afraid, so I'm going to do this thing to try to get this thing out of my house, then no, you're going to attract more fear. That's just how it's going to work. But there is no one specific answer where you can say, only this religion has the answer, or only this culture has the answer. Everybody is on that continuum. And that's one of the things that I would talk about often in my the social work programs that I was working with, because they would come in and say, my way has to be the answer. They would say, I'm going to fix this family and I'm going to make them believe these things. And when I can make them believe these things, then all the things will be well and everything's going to be fine. And that's just not how it works. You can't approach, say, for example, a Buddhist family in the same way that you're going to approach a Muslim family. It's two different belief systems. So what's going to make someone, for example, who really loves painting and art and cats feel better is not going to be the same thing that makes the person, say, for example, who finds their zen and their joy working on trucks and doing math problems. It's not going to be the same. And it's not that anything is wrong with either. Nothing is wrong with either. But what gets them to that better feeling place is going to be different, and it's different with everybody. So when you turn around and you have, like, for example, my good friend, she's Cree, and she uses smudging, and she finds that it's very helpful because it brings her right into that connected state that she needs to be in. And it's wonderful for her. For me, that's not my thing. I'm not Cree. That's not where I get my power from. For me, it's through meditation and things like that. Neither one is incorrect.
And that's another tool that can be used to alter the thought. So we're changing the mind. And at the very minimum, all we need to do is let them know that they're heard and they're not alone.
Validation is everything.
Validation is the key.
Yeah.
So, thank you for doing that, because you're doing the same thing, and it's on the other side of the world, or wherever, it's the same thing. Different. You're right. Like, different methods, different. That's where it gets mixed up, because we have different faiths and religion and beliefs, but there's still a source. What's common is that there is something above us. There is a higher power. There is another source that is the all creator. We call it something different. We have different practices to change our mind. We know enough that when we're feeling negative, we need to do something to alter our state. Yeah. So we're smart enough to know that bad is bad, and we want it, and good is good, and we want more good. Sometimes we get stuck, and so it's light work.
And it's there's so many different terms for it, and as I say, all these cultures all over the world have a gem to share. You know, like I was talking about the blue zones, you know, and these blue zones, all different cultures all over the world, but every single one of them prioritizes joy. And that really is what everybody wants at the end of the day. Everybody wants joy. We want peace. We want to be, you know, living our passion. We want to be connected with all that is. We want that feeling, whatever that looks like for us. And, you know, where people get stuck, and where a lot of investigators, I think, get stuck, is that they think, well, that has to look like mine. And if it doesn't look like mine, well, then that's why you're having all this trouble. You're just not doing what I'm doing. And it's like, no, that's not how this goes. You know, this is going to look different for everybody. And your job is not to fix them. Your job is to just allow them the space to find where they need to be to bring that joy, you know, back into their experience. And when you've got that, which is why I wrote my book, Teaching the Living, when you've got that piece in place, then all of a sudden, you know, now we've got something that we can really work with, and it's a common denominator among everyone, no matter what language you're speaking.
I agree. I mean, we all want to feel the same. All we need is a little bit of love, and that changes everything. Again, no aliens, humans, still humans.
There's a really interesting book, and I don't know if you've ever read it, but if you haven't, definitely pick it up. It's by a fellow by the name of David Halperin, and it's called The Intimate Alien. And it was a really interesting book. And I don't necessarily agree with the entire thing, because I'm one of these people. I do believe that there's definitely other creatures and things out there that we don't know. And the element to his book is the fact that he says, you know, no, this is completely human. The whole thing is just, you know, a projected thought and whatever. And I think there are other critters out there, and whatever. But the concepts that he brings forward in his book are very, very interesting, and very much along the lines of what we're talking about. You know, it's just how much of this is you know, our projected thought, and then the projected thought that begins thinking, and it's really cool.
I do believe that there is something else out there. There might be extraterrestrials, but I don't think they have any interest with us. And the ghosts and things like that, that's more human stuff too. But like, oh shit, I lost my train of thought. Damn it.
Okay. It'll come back.
Yeah. All right, let's look at this. I got your website open. We got a little bit of time here. So if you want to maybe walk me through what we could find on your website, maybe we'll just talk about it so others can explore and learn. Yeah, you mentioned a book too. Like, can we find that on here?
You sure can. Books are right up on the main menu at the top.
Right there.
There you go. So yeah, so I've written two, and the third one, Winter Legends and Lore, is one that I actually did the foreword for and illustrated with a good friend of mine, Chad Lewis. He did the research and the writing. That one will be out later this year. But the other two, Teaching the Living, From Heartbreak to Happiness in a Haunted Home, that book ultimately is exactly what we've been talking about. And I had written it originally. It was shorter actually originally than what it is now. But this is the second edition that was just published earlier this year, and it was serving as a guide for people that were looking into this type of philosophy, and for anybody to be able to pick up, that covers exactly what we're discussing right here, different types of haunting phenomenon, how it's all connected, and along this line of thinking, this idea of thought creating reality, and the science to back it up, what's there behind it, and how do you deal with it, how do you apply it to your own way of being. And the Gift of Instinct, Paranormal Lessons for an Extraordinary World, just came out actually very recently here, and it's a book that was, I wanted to make these lessons practical for people. So what I did was I looked throughout parapsychology for the great minds and the great stories, and many people will be very familiar with, to find the lessons, the life practical lessons within this stuff that people can relate to get themselves connected back with all that is. And this book was really about if you've had a goal or you've had something going on within your experience that you haven't been able to get to, and you're just looking to rediscover the magic in the world with the paranormal, this is the one. So both of the books are available on the website through Amazon's.
Perfect. And when's this one coming?
That one is coming out, I believe, late fall. So I'm guessing probably October, November. And that'll be through Chad Lewis's website, which is chadlewisresearch.com. And it's a collection of crazy winter folklore and just some of the creepiest stories that have been concocted throughout history. And it's really, really fun.
So this is your podcast?
Podcast. Yeah, and it was formed with a very famous Canadian podcaster, true crime podcaster, Mike Brown, who does the show Dark Poutine, and is he ended up writing a best-selling book here just the other, I guess it was last November, which has been on the bestseller charts now for a while. And Supernatural Circumstances we wanted to put a podcast together to talk about these types of issues, to bring a little bit of empowerment into people's world. And we talk with some of the brightest and best minds in the field of whether it be cryptozoology or parapsychology, ufology, psychologists, artists, and we try to bring the real stuff to the table in the most entertaining way that we can. So we've had some fantastic guests and fantastic topics every time that I sit and get to do an interview with some of these people, I'm learning constantly. So if people want to check it out, it is on every single podcast platform you can ask for, including iHeartRadio and many others. But yeah, Supernatural Circumstances.
I also put the link in the comment section too. So
perfect. Thank you.
As well as the link to your two books too.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so events you wanted to talk about too, right? So you're doing events?
Yeah, there's always something going on. So one of the things that I really, really love to do, and it's my passion above most of the other things, is the fact that I get to present these subject matters to people in the most unique way that I can. And a lot of my background is in theater. So for me, being able to do live shows, live theater shows, live presentations is one of my absolute passions. And the thing that's been missing in parapsychology has been a way to get the right scientific information to the general public in a way that is not them sitting down and reading a bunch of boring papers. Because you don't need to fake this stuff. You don't need to be, out there creating stories and faking evidence and this kind of a thing. The real stuff is where the magic is. And so for me, it's been trying to figure out these different theater shows that I can bring to different people, different communities all over, and present this stuff in a way that is memorable, it's fun, it's exciting, dynamic, and something that people are going to remember. And then they can, go look the information up afterwards, and they can find out that it's not fake. So, so all my live events are on entityseeker.ca, and I'm available for bookings and whatnot as well. So if people want to give me a shout, email me through my website, and can arrange that also. So that's oftentimes how shows get to different communities. People can email me and find out.
So I just noticed you put our show on there for tonight. Thank you.
I sure did.
Thank you for doing that. So you're going to be at this place next. This is where you're going to be next.
Yeah, and if these workshops, what we call the Haunted Hollow, are just an absolute blast. We've been taking people sort of out from behind the desks and behind their TVs into these locations in this specific beautiful acreage out here in Alberta that has had a plethora of activity on it. And we take you through everything from beginning right to the end in terms of investigations, protocol, the experiences that have happened here, and demonstrate the phenomenon that's actually been going on the property, because it is so frequent. So people have had some absolutely fantastic experiences. We have not had one yet where people haven't experienced anything. And it's been a really great adventure. So the next one is October 8th, but we're booking them right through October so people can come and experience this stuff.
Like you said, this is a dry event. You want to specify. There are a lot of people that like to get liquored up before they go and do these things, especially with the time of year.
Yeah, that's the one thing we're always really careful, is that the people's experiences have to be sober. And it just takes one person to end up ruining stuff for everybody. So we're always making sure people can't come intoxicated. There's no alcohol on site, anything like that. Anything that's disrupting the experience for people, they're out. So we're really, really careful about that kind of thing. And there's dangers on the property as well. We're dealing with a property that's got ponds and lakes on it and things like that. When it's, if it's dark outside, you could easily fall into something like that. So everybody's got to have their wits about them and be prepared for whatever.
So on your television and film and live show section here, do you have any other television things coming up?
Haunted Hospital season 4 will be out this October, which will be really, really good. I know it'll be on TNE in Canada, and usually Travel Channel and Discovery Plus and things like that in the US. Usually places like Destination America and channels like that usually pick it up pretty quickly. They've aired the other seasons. But we're excited about season 4 because they've had some really, really unique stories come up this season, and addressing folklore like the hag and sleep paralysis, addressing stuff like that and whatever. So it's going to be a really different season, I think, for people. And myself and my two co-hosts, Richard Estep and Christopher Brewer, they bring very different sides and opinions to the stories and whatnot. So it's a really great mix of cultures and investigators and stuff like that. But it's season 4, it should be coming out pretty soon, and hopefully we'll get greenlit for a season 5. We'll see what happens here.
Okay, well, season 4, I can't believe it's season 4. I helped with the research for season 1.
Awesome.
Did some background investigations for I think his name's Tobin.
Yep.
Yeah. So you see Tobin, tell him I said hi.
I will. He's a fantastic person.
I know.
Just love working with him.
I'm a little rough on the edges, so he's been trying to get me in the seat for a while, but I'm a different style in terms of explaining things. I usually explain things away, as he politely told me.
Right.
So that's otherwise I'd be sitting there with you. So that's great. That's great. All right. So we have 10 minutes left. What would you like to talk about?
That is a very good question. We've covered so much already. I think whenever we get to have a conversation like this, I think it's so valuable, and it's so important because people go back on discussions like this. That's the wonderful thing about things like YouTube is people can go back on these conversations for years to come, and I think to be able to sit down and have this these conversations are it's so invaluable. And for people to be able to get these resources and get these links to connect in a way that will help further their own journey and their story. That's one of the reasons why I love sitting down with people like you to be able to talk about this, and hopefully there'll be some aha moments for people that'll watch this going forward.
Yeah, because we're all trying to eat the same or tackle the same problem, I guess.
Yeah.
And we all have different backgrounds and different educations, different understandings, but we're all trying to help our people understand things that can't be explained,
and trying to understand it ourselves. I think that's part of this journey too, is I think realizing, and I know for me it's like I get to this point where I think I've read everything, or I've been through X amount of phenomena or whatever, and then something new pops up and you start to question, like, okay, what is this now? Like I've never seen this before. And so I think it's being able to share in that journey with the people as we're moving along, And I once, when I had a larger team that I was working with, I once fired a guy for turning around and saying, I've learned everything, I don't need to learn anymore. And I fired him because that's not how this is. That's not how this works. Yeah, it's just not, that's not what this universe is about. And, it is constantly expanding, it's constantly unfolding. And ultimately, this is really, this is the journey that we're all on and all experiencing, trying to figure out like what our place is in this universe. It's really wild.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, let's start. I got one question here that I haven't asked. We'll kind of end on it, I guess. In terms of, I guess, evidence. So through your experience with everything else, like we're talking theories and we're talking science, things that have been measured, but to like proof, is there any specific device or tool that could be used that you prefer that gives the best evidence?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I think one of the first tools that we have to rely on is ourselves. Mm-hmm. That's, I think, the first biggie. One of my favorites, I think, has over the years in terms of equipment is probably bounces between. I really enjoy the trail cams when it comes to the cryptid side of things. So those have been, I find, just a blast. Because you go out, you find out that there's stuff on there, the camera's fired, you get all sorts of stuff. Mm-hmm. But parapsychology wise, one of my favorites I think is the tri-field meter. And there was one particular version of the tri-field meter that I really like, because what it does, and so many of the drive me nuts, because so many of the shows they don't have any clue how to use these things. But one of my favorite versions is actually one that once you tune it, you set it down and you walk away, and it comes out with this horrendous high pitch whine. But what it does is it actually samples the immediate environment within a certain range, and it samples the normal level of electromagnetics within the environment, and it basically is looking at a field around it. So when something passes through that field, the tri-field meter will spike, and it makes this horrendous, like, whiny alarm noise. But what I love about this, and oftentimes you see them on people on the show walking around with these things, and of course they're going off like crazy because they're moving them. You can't move them. You have to sit them down and walk away from them. But it's probably one of my favorite things, because the only thing that can disrupt this field is something that has some sort of ability, usually biological ability, to actually disrupt that magnetic field that it's reading. And so when something like that goes off, like a cat would set it off, you and I would set it off, nothing else should be able to set it off, especially if it's sitting still. And when that thing goes off, the hairs on the back of your neck definitely go up, because something's disrupted that field. So I think that's my favorite toy out of all of them, because it's the one that you just, something's moving, something's there, something's moving, and it's not like a trick of the eye. This is something that is registering a frequency. It's pretty cool. Hey,
and the noise would give chills too. I'd like that you said the tri-field meter and not the K2 meter.
Oh, yeah, no.
So what are your thoughts on the K2 meter?
Well, I think the K2 is just very inaccurate. And at the end of the day, anything can set the damn things off, especially things like, you get a text message and your phone's not on airplane mode, that'll set it off. All sorts of various environmental influences can trigger it. And we actually do a segment at the Haunted Hollow for the students there with the K2 meters, and show them how to trigger the meters, just so that they can understand just how easy it is for these things to go off. So they're just not very accurate. And I mean, you're not using like the traditional copper coil like you'd be getting in a electrician's meter or something like that. It's just not as not what I would refer to people as something that's very
like it's essentially an RF detector, but it's been marketed, so that way it could be sold for paranormal and all those other things.
Yeah, it's pretty and it lights up. That's what people see, right?
So an RF meter that you would use to find a hidden camera in the private investigating world. I have this one device. It's got an antenna. It's actually more similar to the EMF detector that they use in Supernatural.
Okay.
Pull it out and they pull the thing out and do it. But that's an actual bug sweeper.
Yeah.
So you're actually looking to find where you can dial down to where the energy is. It has a dial on it, so you can bring it all the way up, and then it'll make noise. But then if you can tone it down so the noise stops,
right,
your baseline, like a quick. It doesn't measure it in terms of data, but audible. So you have your baseline, and then you'll be able to, once you sweep, and then if it beeps, then you dial it down a little bit more, get a little closer, and then boom, you find the hidden camera, you find the hidden microphone. So the K2 meter is essentially the same technology, except it's super sensitive and you can't dial it down.
Yeah.
I like the REM pod, which is a similar device, creates that magnetic field, and you got that beacon, and you can test it where the range is.
Yeah.
So you can actually see the antenna there, and you can see how far it is, and then you can be like, okay, everybody needs to go this far away. And when that thing goes up, that thing always gives me fucking chills.
Yeah, I like something that, where something's, interfering with the baseline, because I think that's one thing that a lot of investigators they miss, is where, they're saying, oh, there's a spike here or a spike there. Well, yeah, but you don't know what's normal, and until you know what's normal, you don't know whether something's abnormal.
And you have to do a baseline, and
you have to.
What I also like to do is I like to use all three of those devices. I'll use the REM pod, I'll use the tri-field meter, I'll use my normal bug detector, I'll even have a K2, but I'll have them all sitting down in the spot, because if it's just a sweep of something coming by, maybe the sensitive one, the K2 picks it up, but the rest don't. But if the REM pod goes off and it's buzzing and everything else is moving, now you got to look at all of these different devices, the engineering behind all of these devices. Even if one is defaulted or broken or the batteries are dead, how did all of them go off?
Yeah.
So that's a tool. It still doesn't prove any more than a single device, but if anything, it kind of reinforces that particular moment.
Yeah.
You can't blame the device being faulty.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, anytime you have more than one witness, especially technology-wise, it just helps to back up, right?
You need to have a video camera to film.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. What is it that it's detecting? Is it detecting my own thoughts? Because I'm like thinking in that moment, do something. Comes out, go off, like it's.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's like, is it, are we creating that? I think with EMF, the nice thing about it, and the one thing I like with the tri-field meter is that it's one of those things where, if something has got to come in and disrupt that field, what that is up in the air. I mean, we don't know what that is, but at least that at that point you've got something that has moved from one space to another space in order to disrupt the field and set the meter off, and so you can almost track a bit of movement there. You can track, so there's a little bit more, I think you get a little bit more data from stuff like that than you would just, I don't know, from what it is, as I say, whether it's a thought form or not, who knows, but
well, and that's where you time the reaction too.
Yeah.
Like you ask the question, how long does it take before the object, the candle goes out,
right,
or how much time in between, and then you ask it again, did it happen again? Did it, so like there's, and then that suggests intelligence, but even that, it's still a suggestion.
Yeah.
So, okay, we'll leave it at that. How else, where can everybody find you? Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you. Basically, well, my website's a one-stop shop. It's entityseeker.ca, which is on the screen there. And it's got all my social media links, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. You can find the books there, the podcast links, the works. If you head there, you'll get to all of it. So